God of War is finally here, allowing everyone to live out those fantasies of being a furious dad in the woods at long last. What's more, the verdict from the reviews is fairly unanimous. Kratos' sortie into Midgard is a success. As you almost certainly know by now, the latest God of War swapped the Greek gods for the Norse ones, putting Kratos and us on previously untrodden ground. Chances are there's plenty you know about Norse mythology already, but there's maybe one or two things you've missed, or some slightly different versions you've learned from the likes of Marvel. Or maybe you just fancy a bit of a refresher before you jump in and start swinging your new Leviathan axe about, which is why I'm here to help. Now, obviously a list of every single god in God of War would be super spoilery, but you don't need to worry because, at the time of this recording, I haven't actually played God of War yet. This is just a basic overview of Norse mythology and some of its major players, so while these figures are likely to cross Kratos' path, I can't say they do for sure. If I do mention a particular character is in the game, it's because they appear in a trailer. So, to recap, spoiler free as long as you've seen the trailers, but hopefully accurate in speculation. Right, now that's all cleared up, here are 12 gods that might be in God of War. Now, you probably know the best known figures of this particular pantheon already, those being Odin, Thor and Loki, but there's a lot more to Norse mythology than the one missing an eye, the one with a hammer, and the one who loves practical jokes. So, let's start right at the beginning with Yggdrasil and the Nine Worlds. Yggdrasil is an enormous ash tree that effectively binds the universe together. Its sprawling roots and branches connect the 9 different worlds of Norse cosmology, those worlds being as follows. There's Asgard, home of Odin and the rest of the Aesir, the Aesir being a group of gods, not to be confused with the Vanir, who we'll hear more about later. Alfheim, meanwhile, is the world of the Light Elves. Eldavilir, which I've almost certainly mispronounced, is where the dwarves reside, and then there's Midgard. Midgard is the realm of men and women. The world is a flat disc, so congratulations to any flat earthers watching, and it's encircled by a vast sea. At the centre of the disc is the territory of Midgard itself, which is where at least part of God of War takes place. Jotunheim is the home to the Frost Giants, the enemies of the Aesir, and Vanaheim is where the Vanir live. You can think of the Vanir as a separate set of gods. They live at peace with the Aesir during the time of most Norse legends, although there is a long history of violence between the two. As a result, in an attempt to keep the peace, there are some Vanir that live with the Aesir, and some Aesir that live with the Vanir. Kind of like a mutual leverage thing. Niflheim is the next world, and indeed it was actually the first one to come into existence. It's a dark realm of mist and shadow, and it's to this world that the thickest root of Yggdrasil reaches. And then there's Muspel, which is the fiery realm of Surt, a flame-wreathed giant who's basically just waiting until Ragnarok starts so he can go rake some havoc. And then finally there's Hell, where those who aren't worthy of a seat in Valhalla get sent. Valhalla, of course, is the legendary feasting hall where the most valiant warriors get to drink and fight and generally have a great time together in recognition of their great lives. They get to Valhalla after death by way of the Valkyries, a group of ethereal flying warrior women who carry the souls of the worthy aloft and deposit them in the hall. Right, so that's a very, very basic overview of the geography, so let's crack into some honest-to-goodness gods in Norse mythology, starting with the one who had the biggest hand in making Odin who he is, Mimir. We're not sure from the surviving text whether Mimir is a giant or one of the Aesir, to be honest, but we do know that he would spend most of his time at the well, also called Mimisbruna. Mimir's well is a great font of wisdom, granting nigh on limitless knowledge to Mimir, who was the only one who drank from it. One day, when the worlds were young, Odin came furtively to Jotunheim and stood before Mimir. He asked to be allowed to drink from the well, but Mimir initially refused. Pressed on the matter, Mimir named his price. one of Odin's eyes. Trusting that Mimir would keep his part of the bargain, Odin did what was asked and gouged one of his own eyes from his head. In return, he was permitted to drink from the well and was flooded with knowledge. The Eye of Odin, according to Norse mythology, remains in the well, allowing Odin to see and know more than he could possibly ever had that eye remained in his skull. Mimir, for his part, met a rather unfortunate end. He was decapitated by the Vanir during the Vanir-Aesir War, with the head sent to Odin as an insult. Odin cared tenderly for the head, rubbing it with preserving herbs and singing powerful incantations over it before he placed it in the water of the well beside his own eye. Once in the water, Mimir's head awoke and was again able to dispense sage advice, and so Mimir remains, bobbing around next to a discarded bit of Odin, occasionally advising the Allfather whenever he seeks his counsel. As potent as the waters of Mimisbruna are, however, it takes more than a drink of water and some home surgery to make a god as powerful as Odin, and indeed there's more of his tale to come. Odin gained his knowledge of runes and the vast majority of his power by sacrificing himself to himself, which is quite impressive when you think about it. Stringing himself up on the world tree, Odin hung from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced with a spear and taking no food or water as he pushed himself to the brink of death. Just as he was about to die, however, he looked down and the runes came to him in a sudden rush of knowledge. Shrieking, he fell from the tree newly powerful and filled with knowledge. This is why Odin is sometimes referred to as the gallows god. Odin, for the most part, tends to reside in Asgard, but he also likes to travel abroad in the world of men to see how they live. He is often accompanied by twin ravens named Hugin and Munin, meaning thought and memory. These two act as his messengers, travelling far afield and returning to whisper secrets into Odin's ears. He is also often flanked by Geri and Freki, two wolves whose names roughly translate to the Ravenous Ones. Our third god, Thor, is another of the Aesir's most famous. As you almost certainly know, he's Odin's son and the god of thunder. He wields a hammer called Mjolnir, which was forged by a pair of dwarves we'll talk about in a bit, and his huge frame is girded by a belt called Meggingjord. This belt doubles his already considerable strength. Meggin means power, by the way, and Gjord means belt, so it's quite literally his power belt, which doesn't sound quite as cool when rendered in modern English, does it? While the Thor you picture in your mind's eye might have blonde hair and an Australian accent, he's actually got a shock of red hair and a big red beard to go with it. He's also a bit of a blunt instrument. Where Odin is cunning and sometimes underhand, Thor is straightforward and kind-natured, and with apologies to any Thor fans out there, to be honest, sometimes he's a bit dim. Thor's wife is called Sif. She's a goddess most commonly associated with the earth, but occasionally with fertility as well. In one Norse tale, Loki cuts her beautiful hair off, rendering her absolutely distraught and bald. In order to appease her and save his own skin, Loki arranges a contest between two sets of dwarven brothers, each renowned metalworkers. The contest results in a beautiful circlet for Sif, which boasts flowing golden tresses, but it also causes 5 other wondrous artifacts to be produced, including Thor's hammer Mjolnir. Again, I'll come back to the pair of dwarves that made that in due course. Now, Thor wouldn't be half as interesting or go on nearly as many adventures if it weren't for everyone's favourite antagonist, Loki. While Loki is presented in the Marvel Universe as Thor's brother, that's actually not the case. He's Odin's blood brother, but he's the son of Laufey and Farboti, who was supposedly a giant. Loki is the trickster god who delights in deceiving others and causing mischief. Eventually, he'll go on to fight against Odin and the rest of the Aesir at Ragnarok, but in the vast majority of the myths, he's not actually an enemy of the gods. Instead, he's more of a figure whose excesses are tolerated, if not especially gladly, because he can also be very useful in a pinch. Loki also has the power to shapeshift, taking on a number of forms throughout the better-known Norse myths. Now, I mentioned Loki has a part to play in Ragnarok, and he does. He takes the helm of the Naglfar, which is the largest ship anyone has ever seen, and it's constructed entirely out of the fingernails of the dead, which, I think you'll agree, is pretty gross. However, his influence over the events of Ragnarok goes much further than piloting a giant pile of nail clippings around the place. Ragnarok also heavily features Loki's 3 children. Loki actually has 5 children in all. 2 of them are called Nafi and Vali, but the other 3 are better known to us by far. These children were conceived in Jotunheim, the land of frost giants, with a giant called Angerboda. When Odin discovered their existence, he had them fetched from the land of the frost giants and brought before him so he could decide what to do with them. There was Hel, a young girl who seems perfectly healthy down one side of her body, but dead and decaying on the other. Odin sent her to be the ruler of Hell, taking charge of those who die in unworthy ways and thus miss out on their place at Odin's table in Valhalla. Next there was Jormungandr, the great serpent that was still growing as Odin examined it. Odin released it into the sea surrounding Midgard so that it might continue to grow without harming anybody. It grew big enough that it eventually encircled Midgard entirely, earning it the nickname the Midgard Serpent or the World Serpent. And finally, there was Fenrir. Fenrir was a wolf whose growing size and strength unsettled Odin, who sought to restrain the wolf and keep it in chains. The gods tricked Fenrir by asking him to prove his strength in a series of challenges, these challenges being bigger and stronger chains, each set wrought in the hopes they could contain the wolf. Each set failed until the last of these fetters, which was actually a kind of enchanted ribbon made from such things as the footsteps of a cat and the breath of a fish, which accounts for their absence from the world around us today. Fenrir, for his part, sensed treachery in this last challenge. He didn't see any glory in being able to break a ribbon, and therefore he didn't trust the gods to release him after the challenge, if indeed the ribbon turned out to be enchanted. He said he'd only consent to being bound by this magic ribbon if he had someone's hand in his mouth throughout, as a kind of fleshy collateral. Tyr, Odin's son, agreed. Sure enough, Fenrir was deceived, and he was left bound in the ribbon, but not before he bit Tyr's hand clean off. At the discovery of his betrayal, Fenrir railed at Odin, saying he would have fought for the gods at Ragnarok, but instead made a vow to kill Odin himself and eat the sun when the time came. And funnily enough, all of Loki's children indeed do have a part to play in Ragnarok, the final battle of the gods that signals the end of the world and the start of a new one. At Ragnarok, Jormungandr comes ashore, spitting venom and poisoning all sea life, wreaking destruction wherever he goes. He dies in battle with Thor, who himself falls after being engulfed in the snake's venomous spittle. Hel, meanwhile, spills forth all the souls she's ruled over as troops for Loki's army, while he, again, sails about on a disgusting boat. Fenrir, meanwhile, slips his bonds and, true to his word, kills Odin himself before being slain in turn by Odin's son Vidar. Oh, and Fenrir does indeed devour the sun. To step away from the children of Loki and their nefarious deeds and return to the Aesir, Freya is the next figure we'll look at from Norse mythology. Often represented as the most beautiful of all the gods, Freya is actually one of the Vanir who lives among the Aesir as part of their peace agreement. She has 2 most prized possessions, these being a feathered cape that allows her to fly, and a necklace called the Brisingamen. Freya's most memorable exploit is the one in which Thrymr the giant steals Thor's hammer and holds it for ransom, saying he wants to marry Freya as part of the bargain. Freya lends Thor her necklace as he attends the wedding, disguised as Freya, where he eats and drinks an astonishing amount before basically laying waste to everybody there. Like I said, Thor isn't exactly subtle. At least Freya is gracious for her part, though. And since we've just mentioned Mjolnir, now would be a good time to finally get around to Atri and Brock, a pair of dwarves who made several wonders for the gods, including Thor's legendary hammer. Technically not gods, still pretty important. Thor's hammer Mjolnir, as you'll know, never misses its target when thrown, destroys everything it hits, and it will return to Thor's hand whenever he commands it. But what you might not know is that it actually has a design defect. Loki being Loki, he did his best to distract Atri and Brock when they were forging Mjolnir, managing only to make the temperature of the forge fluctuate a bit while they were hard at work. As a result, the handle of Mjolnir is actually a bit shorter than intended, meaning Thor has to wield it one-handed. These two dwarves were actually revealed to be in God of War in one of the early trailers, although Atri appears to have been renamed Sindri. And there you have it, a very basic peek at the structure and key figures of Norse mythology. Doubtless you'll be meeting some of these characters and a few more during your time with God of War, so hopefully this has been able to provide some useful context. If you enjoyed this video, we've got more on God of War for you to watch, including what we loved and what we didn't, and a let's play of the first hour or so be sure to check one of those out. Do like and subscribe for plenty more from Eurogamer, but most importantly, have a lovely day.
Close your heart to their desperation. Close your heart to their suffering.